Well, joining me from Melbourne now to discuss the Israeli election is Dr. Colin Rubenstein, who's the Executive Director of the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council. Colin Rubenstein, thank you for joining us. Benjamin Netanyahu has now got to consider which party to form a partnership with. How will those economic, social and security issues be weighing up in his mind?
Oh, I think they'll be very prominent. This was an election that did focus on those domestic issues. We had 18 months ago the very significant social protest movement in Israel, and the successful parties really tapped into that underlying concern with higher prices and growing inequities, education, healthcare, and certainly in the case of Yesh Atid, of Yair Lapid, the need for some type of universal conscription or service. So they were very important, even though security, of course, the recent war in Gaza, the threat of Iran hangs over the country, but they weren't prominent in the campaign. And actually what the result shows is that contrary to the consensus view beforehand by the pundits that Israel was somehow moving to the right, if anything, they've moved back to the centre-left. And so Mr. Netanyahu really has some important choices to make, whether he goes with more of a right-wing coalition, which he may just be able to do, or alternatively, and I think this would certainly be his preference, he would need to move into the centre and really accommodate those domestic issues and perhaps put together a more enduring, stable coalition that will really react to the groundswell of focus on these socio-economic issues, a more creative approach with these new faces.
There's potentially quite a stark decision here, isn't there, in terms of particularly finding a two-state solution with the Palestinian territories?
Well, look, what the election outcome shows is that the Israelis are for a two-state solution. Israeli democracy is vibrant, it's lively. I mean, this is an amazing result, a rather high turnout, 32 parties, a quarter of the new members of the Knesset are women, 3 of the leaders of 3 significant parties were women, a whole range of sort of ethnic, religious, socio-economic groups. And the move has been to the centre. And Mr. Lapid is in sync with Mr. Netanyahu in supporting a two-state outcome. The problem is that the polls show overwhelmingly Israeli support a two-state outcome. But the real problem is the failure of the Palestinians to come to those negotiations, which the Israelis have wanted for years. And of course, there is the problem of a large part of the Palestinian movement, Hamas in particular, being openly committed to Israel's destruction. So it's not a vote against peace, and the onus really is on the Palestinians. And it won't be a problem for Mr. Netanyahu, especially if he moves not to the right option, but to more of a centrist coalition, would give him much greater flexibility and no real barrier to moving forwards when the opportunity arises. But the Israelis are realistic. Unfortunately, they're pessimistic about the prospects because they understand that the Palestinians are not being forthcoming.
Indeed, Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, the two potential allies for Likud, have one thing in common in that they'll say they won't be dealing with Hamas as long as it remains a leading force in the Palestinian territories. Is that a reasonable expectation to have, that Hamas would somehow bow out of the picture?
Well, look, as Hamas is defying the quartet's preconditions, that it recognises pre-existing agreements, it desists from violence, and it's willing to come to negotiations in recognising Israel. And to the contrary, after the recent Gaza war, Khalid Mashal made it very clear that Hamas is absolutely still committed to Israel's destruction. And there is a problem of reunification with Fatah. And of course, as everybody knows, they're bitter enemies. But even on the Fatah side, we have this upgrading at the United Nations and complete violation of the Oslo agreements. So the problems are that the Israeli public, and the polls show this very clearly, and the election, I think, underscores this as well. they're all for a two-state outcome of two states in genuine peace with one another. But that's not what they see when they look across their borders. And they're going to focus on their domestic issues. But I think they want a government that will be ready to respond to any changes in the sort of unreconstructed hostile position that the Palestinians unfortunately are still taking.
Right, Dr.
And
Rubenstein.
I should add that the proposition that somehow the settlements are a barrier to moving forward is a furphy, because what we're seeing is only growth within existing settlements, no new settlement growth territorially, and so this furphy, I think, should be laid to rest. The onus really is going to be on the Palestinians, you know, to come forward and participate in those negotiations without preconditions, which even the Australian government is calling for.
Right, Dr. Rubenstein, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much.